Picture this: two giants of American rock, both celebrated for telling the stories of the working man, standing on opposite sides of an unspoken feud. John Fogerty, the raw and rebellious leader of Creedence Clearwater Revival, had spent decades fighting for his music, his freedom, and his name. Bruce Springsteen, the so-called boss, had built an empire on blue-collar anthems, earning the love of millions. But behind the admiration and respect, there was something else. Something darker, a clash of egos, a battle for recognition, and a lingering bitterness that never quite faded. For years, Fogerty watched as Springsteen was crowned the voice of America, the one who carried the weight of its struggles in song. But long before Born to Run took over the airwaves, it was Fortunate's Son that had captured the fury of a generation at war. Before Thunder Road became an anthem, Bad Moon Rising had already soundtracked the disillusionment of the American dream. Fogerty had been there first. He had fought the battles, written the songs, and lived the stories. And yet, somehow, it was Springsteen who became the symbol of it all. That was a wound that never healed. Was it jealousy? Was it resentment? Maybe. The feud between Fogerty and Springsteen wasn't born out of a single explosive moment. It was something quieter, more insidious, a tension that simmered beneath the surface, growing with each passing year. It wasn't just about music, it was about legacy, about credit, about who truly deserved the title of rock's great American storyteller. Springsteen, with his poetic lyrics and cinematic songwriting, had managed to craft an image of himself as the everyman's hero. He sang about the factory worker, the struggling dreamer, the forgotten heart of America. But to Fogerty, it all felt too polished, too rehearsed. Where he had lived through the turmoil of label battles, betrayals, and personal loss, Springsteen had enjoyed a career mostly free from the industry's more brutal realities. And yet, it was Bruce who had been crowned the ultimate survivor, the voice of the downtrodden. And that didn't sit right with Fogerty. As the years went on, the comparisons between the two only grew. Critics loved to pit them against each other, two blue-collar poets with different approaches to the same story. Fogerty, always blunt, always fiery, never one to sugarcoat his words, made it clear that he felt undervalued, overlooked in the grand narrative of American rock. And while Springsteen remained diplomatic, the tension was undeniable. Bruce Springsteen's turbulent relationships weren't limited to John Fogerty. Throughout his career, he clashed with some of the biggest names in rock, both within his own camp and beyond. The boss wasn't just a leader, he was a dictator of sound, demanding absolute commitment, perfection, and obedience to his vision. And while that perfectionism built an empire, it also left a trail of fractured relationships, bruised egos, and long-standing rivalries. Inside the E Street Band, the tension was almost unbearable at times. Steven Van Zandt, Springsteen's right-hand man, the guitarist who had been by his side since the early days, walked away from it all in the 1918s. The official story? Creative differences. But behind closed doors, it was a battle for control. Van Zandt, who had been instrumental in shaping the band's sound, grew tired of being overshadowed by Springsteen's iron grip over every detail. The boss had a vision, and there was no room for discussion, no room for another voice to share the spotlight. The fallout left a deep scar, and, while Van Zandt would return years later, the wounds never fully healed. Then there was Max Weinberg, the E Street Band's legendary drummer. To the fans, he was rock solid, the rhythmic backbone of Springsteen's most iconic songs. But behind the scenes, he struggled under the sheer weight of Springsteen's impossible expectations. Every note had to be perfect. Every performance had to match the exact energy that Springsteen envisioned. One misstep, one flaw, and the disappointment was written all over Springsteen's face. It was an exhausting cycle, one that left Weinberg drained, constantly walking the tightrope of trying to meet the impossible standard. But Springsteen's conflicts didn't stop with his band. His rivalries stretched far beyond the E Street stage. His feud with Bob Dylan was a battle of legacies. Two voices of America, two songwriters carrying the weight of generations, but only one could wear the crown. Dylan, a legend long before Springsteen ever picked up a guitar, reportedly resented how the industry positioned Springsteen as his successor. To Dylan, Springsteen's image felt too constructed, too polished, too carefully curated for mass appeal. Where Dylan embraced raw imperfection, Springsteen built a myth, one that was manufactured just enough to make him both an artist and an icon. The rivalry between them was unspoken but undeniable. Dylan never truly embraced Springsteen as an equal, and Springsteen knew it. Then there was Billy Joel, the fellow East Coast legend, another songwriter who wrote for the working man. But while Springsteen was celebrated as a rock and roll prophet, Joel was often labeled as a piano pop star, a title that infuriated him. Joel built his own empire with songs that spoke to heartache, struggle, and survival, yet somehow it was always Springsteen who was seen as the true voice of the working class. Behind the scenes, insiders whispered of Joel's quiet frustration, a lingering bitterness over the industry's relentless hero worship of Springsteen. And then, of course, there was Tom Petty, another rock legend who spent years in Springsteen's shadow. Their relationship was polite on the surface, but behind closed doors, Petty often felt undervalued and overlooked. His brand of heartland rock was just as authentic, just as poetic, yet it never quite earned the same level of reverence and worship. While Springsteen's albums were hailed as masterpieces, Petty's music was sometimes treated as just radio rock. Springsteen's unshakable presence in the rock world left many of his contemporaries feeling eclipsed, unheard, and underestimated. And whether he meant to or not, the boss didn't share the throne easily. For many, the tension wasn't just about competition, it was about recognition, about fairness, about feeling like their work had been diminished simply because Springsteen had been chosen as the industry's golden son. These weren't just rivalries, they were the fractures in Springsteen's legacy. The reminders that even the greatest icons leave behind a trail of resentment, rivalry, and unspoken wounds. Beneath the anthems of resilience and the roaring stadium crowds, Bruce Springsteen carried demons that fame could never silence. To the world, he was the boss, a man who stood for perseverance, grit, and the blue-collar American dream. But behind closed doors, his personal life was unraveling, piece by piece. His first marriage to Julianne Phillips was doomed from the start. It was the perfect Hollywood image, a rock star and a model, the kind of power couple that graced magazine covers. But beneath the surface, there was no real connection. Springsteen, deep in the throes of his skyrocketing fame, had little time for quiet moments of love and companionship. His heart was elsewhere, his mind consumed by music, ambition, and, as it turned out, another woman. That woman was Patti Skalfa, a longtime friend and member of the E Street Band. As his marriage crumbled, Springsteen found himself drawn to her, seeking comfort in the familiarity of someone who truly understood his world. The affair wasn't just a betrayal, it was a scandal. The working-class hero who sang of loyalty and struggle was now at the center of a tabloid storm, caught in a classic rock star cliché. His carefully crafted image was breaking apart, and fans saw a different side of their idol, one that was far less noble, far less perfect. But his personal struggles ran deeper than infidelity. Springsteen was at war with himself. For years he battled crushing depression, anxiety, and an overwhelming sense of self-doubt. Even as he stood on stage before thousands, something inside him was missing. There were nights where the cheers of the crowd felt hollow, where the weight of his own mind dragged him down like an anchor. His mental health struggles, which he later admitted to, were not just passing phases. They were lifelong battles. Some days he was unstoppable, pouring his soul into his music, feeding off the adrenaline of performance. Other days he felt like he was drowning in darkness, incapable of escaping his own thoughts. It took years of therapy and soul-searching for Springsteen to confront his inner turmoil, but the damage had already been done. His relationships suffered, his friendships within the music industry grew strained as he withdrew into himself, lost in his own mind. The boss, the man who was supposed to be unshakable, was crumbling under the weight of his own expectations, his fame, and his relentless pursuit of something that always seemed just out of reach. The world saw him as a legend, but behind the scenes, he was just a man fighting demons no one else could see. As John Fogerty speaks out, fans are forced to reevaluate the legend of Bruce Springsteen. Yes, he is a rock god. Yes, he is a poet of the American experience. But beneath the myth is a man who fought as hard as anyone to secure his place at the top. A man whose legacy wasn't just built on talent, but on carefully navigating the industry, on outlasting his rivals, on ensuring that his name was the one history would remember. Fogerty's words don't just expose a feud. They expose the cost of greatness, the sacrifices, the betrayals, and the bitter rivalries that shape even the most untouchable of icons. Because behind every anthem, behind every sold-out stadium, behind every carefully curated legend, lies a story of struggle, ego, and the fight to be the last man standing.